This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 7 awesome people. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Kurt Magnuski, and Michael Fritschy. Thank you all for helping make this show possible.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have with me Barbara Fisher.
Hey, how's it going?
From 6 Degrees of John Keel. And Wren Collier.
Hey, everyone.
From, I don't know, where are you from?
The internet.
Wren's Nest.
The liminal bird himself.
Mm-hmm.
Is liminal bird your Twitter handle?
It is, yes.
Does it still work now that it's X?
Yes, it still works. That's still it, yeah. And also, I think it's the same name on Blue Sky as well. I'm also on that now.
Well, I mean, it's not a blue bird anymore. So, I mean, liminal bird shouldn't it be liminal X?
That's true. Honestly, the whole liminal thing, everyone has that or uses that term now. But I literally started using that term, 15 years ago because it was in an anime I watched.
Oh.
So I was really ahead of the curve on that one. I just wanted to
I don't think that term came into my usage until I read Hansen.
Yeah, I never read it anywhere before seeing it, and I think it was the Dot Hack anime, and that must have been 2006 or something.
Oh, see, I was using it in English papers and a long time ago to discuss those in between places and times and stuff like that you find in romantic poetry. So. I got you both beat, but that's not too surprising. I'm older than you both are, I'm pretty sure. So,
and try not to swear, Barbara.
I will try. I'm always the one that screws it up.
That's okay. I could just mark it and delete it.
There she goes again.
Yeah, liminality came into my worldview from Hansen, and then Jeff Ritzmann, of course, really kind of focused in on it.
Yeah, he liked that word.
Yeah, he also got it from Hansen. So
it's become a really hot term lately because of the whole backrooms thing and sort of this internet meme obsession with liminal spaces. It's like airports, empty shopping malls, that sort of thing. It's like a nice post-consumerist wasteland thing that's going on at the moment.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's all these great places that could be repurposed for useful things, and they just sit empty.
Yeah, and I mean, it does capture a certain eeriness. I mean, anyone who's done urban exploration kind of gets this, but sort of the eeriness of a place that's meant to have people in it, but is completely empty, like an empty mall, for instance. I don't know if people have ever gotten out of a movie 2 a.m. or something in a mall and everything's closed and it's just all the lights are still on, but there's no one in there, and it can be very spooky. And that whole backrooms subgenre of YouTube horror stuff really captures that really well.
I always love that feeling. Actually,
it's a cool feeling. I mean, I think that's why it's so attractive to people, because it's eerie, but it's also comforting in a way.
It's like I would pick up a friend of mine from New York City at 3 a.m. during the week, and there'd be nothing. And it's it's New York City, and there's no cars on the road. It's this is awesome.
I always remember really loving that time of night when all the bars would close, and there'd be no one on the roads or the streets, and the lights would switch over to just blinking red.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they don't do that here.
Yeah, they did that in Alabama, in the little town I was from, and it was always kind of surreal because it was very quiet. There was no one out, no other cars, and just these lights that normally go green and red all day, and this predictable pattern is flashing red.
Huh. All right. Yeah, that is one of the reasons I like being up at night, is that sense of like no one being around.
Yeah, witching hour. I mean, that's where we get that term from.
And it's also one of the things about, post-COVID that drives me crazy is that no stores here are open 24 hours anymore.
Same here.
Yeah, I used to be like, okay, I got to go shopping. I'll go at 3 unless I need to pick up a prescription or something. I'm going at like 2 or 3 in the morning when there's nobody in the store.
Yep.
And I felt like the dumbest thing they did during the pandemic when they locked everything down. They're like, well, go to the store when less people are there, and all the stores like minimized their hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, you did the opposite of what you should do. You should be encouraging people to go at like midnight.
Yeah.
Instead, you're closing at 6.
It wasn't the brightest thing that was done.
No. But anyway, tonight we are going to talk not quite about disclosure. I'm not even sure how to define what we're going to talk about here. It's a mix of some of the stuff we're seeing in the disclosure movement that Wren actually called a while ago. So why don't you start, Wren?
Okay. Yeah. So when a lot of these hearings, like the Grusch hearings and stuff, started coming out, and I noticed that there was a real hesitancy to use the word extraterrestrial, right? Like it was consistently the term like non-human was used. And even thinking back in retrospect, the move away from flying saucer and UFO to UAP kind of fits this as well. But it became clear to me that what was probably going on was that the big reveal, the big disclosure, and there were constantly guys who were like, oh, when you really learn about the disclosure, it's going to be something that you didn't expect. It's going to be stranger than people realize. Right. And I think some people should have already seen the writing on the wall in this anyway, considering the Secret Machines book that came out, when the To the Stars stuff first popped out. Levenda's involvement in that should have been a clue to people, but that I pretty much knew. And then plus two, learning who is in the sort of Grusch circle, right? Like learning that it's all just ex-Aviary guys. It's like Hal Puthoff. It's the same old characters that have been around forever. And I was like, they're going to make this into a Collins elite UFOs and aliens are actually demons, spiritual warfare thing, like 100%. And the other shoe on that hasn't completely dropped. They haven't just come out and said that. But then recently there's this ex-CIA guy, Jim Simivan. I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
I think it's Simivan, but whatever.
Yeah. So he's did this whole interview where he's talking about that there's some kind of non-human intelligence that's living with us on this planet, and that it can control people's minds and put thoughts in their head, and it can like manipulate society. And it's just demons. I mean, it's just spirits. Like, it's just this idea. And what's frustrating about it to me is that compared to the alternative, like the extraterrestrial hypothesis, they're actually closer to what I believe is the truth than ET folks. Like, because I do believe that these things are probably not aliens, but are non-human, probably some psychic in nature. And, I do stuff in the occult, so I definitely believe in like spirits and the reality of that sort of world. But I also don't cover it in the same sort of blanket way. Like they're obviously looking at it from this like Christian eschatological framework. And I mean, I don't know. Barbara, how do you feel about like some of the stuff that's been
when he said there's a non-human intelligence living amongst us, I was like, dude, tell me something that I don't already know. Like, seriously. I was glad to see him not bringing up ET. That's definitely a step in a right direction. I find it troublesome that they're looking at it purely from a fundamentalist, Christian, sometimes kind of Jewish and sometimes kind of Muslim, but mostly Christian worldview that insists that the writings of John the Revelator are true, and it's going to happen just like that. And that therefore it means any non-human intelligence that does not say fear not and come in a burst of light and tell you that he's from God, you should be afraid of. And I think that's going to be used and manipulated. And there's just way too much dominionism in there, wanting to, turn our government into a Christian theist mess.
Mm-hmm.
Because, what's going to happen at that point? People like you and I, Wren, and, Seriah with his, long hair and heavy metal, we're all going to be, the bad guys.
Yeah.
Because we have conversations with non-human intelligences.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the scary part for me, because I've definitely been hypothesizing around that angle about if you're claiming that there is this intangible non-human intelligence that can control people's minds, well, it's not that difficult to then move straight to witch trials, right? And say someone is like the way they are. Maybe they're gay because an alien demon, non-human intelligence is like possessing them and making them that way.
Right.
And this quickly gets into some very dark territory.
It sure does.
Scared of. That's like a legitimate fear that I have about the way this is going. I mean, I guess what has been interesting seeing this develop is that it really seems like there are multiple factions too, though, that are like vying for this narrative. Like you have the sort of Collins elite Aviary angle, which, is very much this sort of fundamentalist apocalyptic thing. But then I think you also sort of have too a contingent of maybe like military guys who are interested in the phenomena for like, in so much as they can get like Lockheed Martin and Boeing like big contracts to like research it.
Right.
There's like a military industrial faction involved in this discussion as well. And I don't feel like those two factions are necessarily cooperating.
And then I think you have people like Vallee, who's like, okay, so they're non-human intelligences from here. Good. Hey, do we really have to have that demon thing?
Yeah.
Do we really have to, have that Christian taint all over that's going to be fascist and creepy, And so there's other people there, but man, I haven't read the Collins Elite book in forever because I didn't like it because it scared me. I didn't not like it because I thought it was wrong. I thought it was correct, and I didn't want to read it again.
I've never actually read it, so do you want to give people a little bit of a little idea of what it is?
Wren, you start off.
Okay.
Because you've read it more recently than me, I think.
Yeah. So Final Events is a book by Nick Redfern. Actually, when was this published? I'm like holding my copy of it right now. Because there's an interesting passage I was going to read from it that, so this is 2010. Wow. Then it's really spooky. He was, it's a book about Nick's encounters with this guy, Reverend Ray Boeche, who is this guy who claims that he's like a religious, I think he's like a preacher. He was approached by a group of sort of like a secret group within the U.S. military industrial complex that he called the Collins Elite, that basically believed that UFOs and aliens, all that kind of stuff was a demonic invasion, and that they were trying to control people's minds or basically like bring about the end times. They're going to like eat our souls and all this kind of stuff. And Redfern himself doesn't like really go into some of the history of like the Collins Elite. And I always wondered about that name. And it wasn't until I read Go Rightly's Saucer, Spooks, and Kooks that I realized where this was coming from. The Collins name actually comes from the Aviary member, Air Force Captain Robert Collins. And the Aviary itself was, there's a thing about the Aviary in this, what does he say about it? Yeah, so Dr. Ron Pandolfi, he was a member of the Aviary, and he informed, he was talking to, who's this guy? Vince Johnson in the early 90s, and he described the Aviary as nothing more than the product of the somewhat deranged mind of retired Air Force Captain Robert Collins. Pandolfi said that Collins was discharged from the Air Force after breaching the security perimeter at the Manzano nuclear weapons storage facility at Kirkland, AFB. And when taken into custody by base security, Collins told them that he was there to meet the president. But the Aviary itself was a group of military guys and civilian researchers like Hal Puthoff who were studying the UFO phenomena from like a psychic angle. And it's weird. Like I would love to know like where some of them fall on some of this on some of these lines, because I don't think they're all in that same apocalyptic boat. But there's one guy in particular, Dan T. Smith, who was known to the Aviary as Chicken Little, and he was apparently this is in like the early 90s, and this guy was claiming that there were grave concerns by high government officials about impending metaphysical catastrophe, the eschaton, or the end of the world. And in a 1993 article that Vince Johnson guy mentioned before wrote, according to Smith, UFOs are primarily a psychological, metaphysical phenomenon which are both preparing us and pressuring us to develop our own psychic abilities. Not that UFOs are a single type of entity. Smith asserts that there are powers and principalities, which is the line from the Bible, at work, presumably supernatural entities like angels and demons. Furthermore, he said that a radical program of parapsychological research and development is currently underway near Los Alamos, New Mexico. The group's development of psychokinesis, psychotronics, a term used to denote psychic warfare techniques, represents a danger of eschatological proportions. These techniques have been available but controlled throughout history. Now other entities are forcing the issue, said Smith, which is interesting because I've long speculated that the remote viewing program was shut down by Collins' elite sort of influence. And that would line up with what Dan Smith was saying here, where he's like looking at this psychic research stuff and being like, no, we don't need to mess with this. Like, this is what they want us to like involve ourselves with. But in Nick Redfern's book, he goes into sort of, it's a long book, but it basically goes into what he believes, or not what Nick believes, but he interviews some different people who are part of the group and like what they believe the end goal of all this is. It said in 2010, he was talking to this guy, Robert Manners, who was sort of involved in this stuff. And this guy says in this kind of like eerie passage at the end, can you imagine the entire country maybe 10 years from now? So like literally right now. And after the next 9/11, a dirty bomb in a big city, maybe policed and controlled by the U.S. military, an army totally convinced and believing that what they're doing is according to what God wants and that will save the U.S. from a satanic threat. That's the crux of what's going on. Indoctrinate troops today for when they're needed here tomorrow. I call it biblical Big Brother. Just watch. 10 years from now, the U.S. military will be indistinguishable from religious warriors. That's the plan. Save the country by keeping it under a religious iron fist and enforcing Christianity on everyone. Mm-hmm. But if that's to be the future of Christianity, I'm not sure it's worth it. It's not the Christianity I want taught.
And I mean, you do see this at some political quarters?
Yes, you do.
I don't know if you necessarily see it out of the military, though.
There's a lot of not brass, but lower level command figures who deal with soldiers, not desk jockeys, but people who actually are in command of men, who do Bible verses and talks with their soldiers. I mean, there's been cases of that happening, and then soldiers will complain, and then there's an investigation. It's fairly common. There's Bible circles in the barracks and stuff like that. They're trying. I don't know how well they're succeeding, but they're trying.
Yeah, there's another bit earlier in the book where he's talking to that same guy, Robert Manners. And Manners apparently left the Collins elite because of sort of these plans and this sort of Project Blue Beam kind of thing that they wanted to do. Because what he became, apparently what he said the plan was to do like an Ozymandias Watchmen style thing, right? Where you convince people on a large scale that this is real, right? And you do it as a way to like keep them from, God, how do I explain this? Like, you make people believe it's real so that then, like, you can control the way they think about it and therefore, like, prevent these entities from actually, like, hijacking people's brains or something.
Yeah, it sounds real sus to me, really.
He said,
Isn't Bluebeam, weren't they talking about faking the second coming?
Yes.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
in itself, isn't real, but the idea of using a sort of deception like that as a societal, control thing, that totally is real.
Yeah. And
So,
I mean, there's people who've been trying to bring about the second coming by forcing the issue, which is totally extra biblical nonsense.
yeah.
But I mean, people have been talking about that in the fundamentalist churches since the late 70s, early 80s. So, we'll bring Jesus back if we do this to fulfill this prophecy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's not, put tab A in slot B and you get Jesus.
Right.
It's not,
right.
That's not, it says none shall know of my coming.
Yeah.
Right there in the red letters.
And I want to be clear that we're not attacking people who are Christians here. This is more of a manipulation strategy by people in higher ranking positions.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. I was reading the Bible earlier today. Definitely have no antipathy towards Christianity. There's another line along that same line, Barbara, before that, where he's talking to this Robert Manners guy, and he's talking about why he left the Collins elite. And he said the mere discussion of such a plan was enough to make the man leave the Collins elite, never to return. Trying to expose deceptive entities via the creation of another deception was not where I wanted to go, the man told me. The irony of all this, he said, was that the ruse of trying to save the souls of the people of Earth via the implementation of a stage-managed religious charade designed to convert one and all to Christianity might ultimately only help fulfill the ancient prophecies by unwittingly opening the door for the Antichrist to take control of a new world order-style future. In other words, what the bogus Project Bluebeam stories foretell could actually occur. But then I know, too, there are people who want to fill those end-time prophecies because they believe that, they get it started, the rest of it'll fall into place. So it almost makes me wonder, too, if this isn't just part of that eschatology, like wanting to, light the fire, basically, for the end times by convincing everyone that UFOs are actually demons.
Has anyone actually said that in the disclosure movement yet?
They shy away from actually saying that. The closest I think anyone has said to something like that is Whitley Strieber, referring to these entities as the Djinn, which, the Djinn themselves aren't necessarily demons, not in the same way we think in Christianity, but close enough to some people. And I think that's about as close as it's gotten. I'm curious how this is going to play out, because I don't necessarily expect for them to come out swinging with the Christian angle.
I hope not.
I think the first idea is the first step in it is to get people to believe that these are not necessarily extraterrestrials, but are some sort of intangible, non-human entity that lives among us. And then you can kind of work the other stuff in more subtly.
Well, it seems like they've just, for what I've seen, they sort of replaced evil alien with evil interdimensional, evil something else. But evil's always a part of that. They're always there as harmful things.
Yeah. Which is
even even Strieber, he'll go back and forth with his visitors as to whether they're evil or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the same book, he'll be like, oh, well, this is, they want to share your soul with you. They want to feel the experiences of being alive and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, get your own damn body. Sorry, but it seems logical to me. They don't possess us. They are here for our own good. And if we allow them this, then they will help us preserve the earth, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, if they really cared about us, they'd just help us preserve the earth.
Right.
And then we could share as if we wanted to. It's not a, hey, if you don't want to destroy everything, come and let us, take a little taste of your life and see what it's like, and we'll be friends. And I'm like, that just sounds wrong. And then sometimes he comes out and says they're dangerous and you shouldn't try to commune with them. He literally goes back and forth in the same books. And I mean, Keel is one of the ones who occasionally would say straight up, they're demons.
Yeah. Because Keel considered himself a demonologist.
Yeah. I mean, he would just come straight out and go, this is the action of demons. And the way he described demons, it was non-human intelligence that's out to get mankind, which isn't, too far off. It's pretty good.
Yeah. And in some cases, that's the truth. I mean, anybody, and that's why I'm sympathetic to Strieber in some sense, because that waffling is what it's what you understand when you work with and encounter this stuff over many years. Like in my practice working with spirits and stuff, you learn that some of them are friendly and some of them aren't.
Yeah.
And not all of them have your best interests in mind. And some of them tell you stuff that you want to hear. And you have to approach it all. And most people aren't equipped or need to approach it at all. Like, I don't even really encourage people to do magic and stuff anymore, which is me changing my tune from a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I feel you. I try too,
Yeah, because it's like, this stuff can be dangerous and people probably shouldn't mess with it. But, some of us can't help ourselves.
Curiosity gets us every time.
It can be dangerous, but is it as dangerous as driving a car? Really?
No.
When you think about it?
No, not really.
Not in the immediate scale of time, no.
See, to me, most of the experiences I've had have been positive, and the negative ones have usually led to some sort of growth. So maybe I'm an anomaly here, but like my communications with these things, they seem to have basically always told me the truth and led me to good places.
It's the same for other people too, Seriah. I mean, I'm kind of in the middle. Most of the time it turns out well. Sometimes I screw up real bad and, dumb shit happens. And Barbara did it, consequences of your own actions, kid. What'd you do that for?
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's certainly been times where I've been told stuff and I ignored it and then things went bad. And I'm like, okay, well, you did tell me.
Well, yeah, you did say.
I didn't listen, and then I had to learn the hard way, but I learned.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had encounters that were wholly negative, mostly during out-of-body experiences and stuff. They were learning experiences in the sense that they taught me what I was capable of and what I could defend myself against, but it's not like the thing that was being aggressive was trying to teach me anything. It was just trying to have lunch.
Are you sure though? Maybe it was trying to pull that out of you.
Well, maybe. I mean, I have had experiences that were obviously a learning kind of experience, right? Where something was trying to teach me a lesson. I've had those too. Because I think that, it's like an ecosystem of entities, right? Some of them are just animals, and some of them are people. Some of them have thoughts and feelings and histories and stuff. Some of them are just wild animals. And you kind of know when you encounter that. They're not all of the same level of complexity.
True.
Well, humans are like that too.
Yeah.
Some of us are generally good, and we generally don't do any harm to anybody. I mean,
not intentionally.
Not on purpose. Exactly. And then, there are people who just get off on being cruel. I mean, that's just what some people do. And then most people are in between those two.
And most people don't think they're the bad guy.
No.
Yeah.
I had rewatched the movie Falling Down recently because it's been a long time since I've seen it. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's about this guy who just basically, the little things finally get to him and he goes nuts and tries to fix everything while trying to get back home to his family who doesn't want him there because he was kind of abusive. So he's a very complex character. And at the very end, he gets confronted by the cop, and one of the things he says, he looks at him, he goes, "Wait, I'm the bad guy?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, that right there, I think sums up a lot of people where, they're the bad guy, but they don't think they're the bad guy. They don't realize what they're doing is harmful because they're not seeing it that way.
Yep. Yeah. I know lots of people like that. Most of them are in my family. I understand.
That's not good.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, there was another element of this I wanted to discuss, which I'm probably going to work this into my presentation this year at Strange Realities, but it's something that I've got some tantalizing bits of, but I'm still trying to like pull on some of these threads and find some more sources. So this is very scant at the moment. So people, please excuse my lack of sources on this stuff. But when I was in Scotland earlier this year on my vacation, I was reading Andrea Puharich's Beyond Telepathy, which is an out-of-print book where Puharich's just talking about like psi research and stuff. It's a pretty cool book. He like really goes heavy into like formulas and like tries to form this whole like scientific idea that the paranormal. Since I am not a mathematician or a physicist, I have no way of knowing if what he's saying is BS or not. But there's an interesting bit at the very end where he's talking about the relationship of weather, like local weather, to psi, like efficacy of psi.
Oh.
And he talks about how like storms and like thunderstorms and stuff can interrupt or interfere with psychic ability. Mm-hmm. And as a supporting argument in this, he brings up that similar things are found in the Lesser Key of Solomon, which was like, that kind of like hit me in the face like a brick, because I was like, wait, Andrea Puharich was like familiar with the Lesser Key.
Right.
He's not bringing this up for like no reason, right? And then I connected that with if anybody's listened to Doc Future, Michael Bennett's old show Future Quake. I think that's what it's called, Future Shock, Future Quake, something like that. He did an interview with Ray Boeche. This is like in the early 2000s, and Ray Boeche mentions he's telling Doc Future about all of these like crazy experiments that were being run in regards to interacting with these entities, and he doesn't use the words Goetia or like he doesn't bring up the Lesser Key, but what he's talking about is like I think he says the CIA was doing it, but he's definitely talking about like ritual magic and conjuring these entities. And he specifically talks about how they were using EVP stuff to communicate with them, like Estes method stuff that's gotten popular recently. And that the research actually drove a couple of the researchers insane and like they committed suicide, and it was kind of shut down after that. But it really makes me wonder, like, how much of an occult angle is there here? Because I don't know if people realize this, but the whole UFOs are actually beings from another dimension or like these sinister things. Because let me step back real quick. The Collins elite also believed that in 1947, when Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard did the Babylon working, that is what like opened the door, right, and allowed all these things in. In a similar vein, in Kenneth Grant's Outside the Circles of Time, Kenneth Grant sort of makes the same argument, and I think that was first published in 1980. So this is before the Collins elite stuff in the early 90s really starts to pop off. And he also claims that the Trinity test is also kind of like what opened the door to the other. Yeah, and that gets brought up in Twin Peaks season 3. And but it originates with Kenneth Grant, and as far as I can tell, that's the origin of that meme. I don't see that anywhere previous to him, and I am pretty convinced that there was some knowledge of like magical texts. I would bet money that if Puharich had a copy of the Lesser Key, it would have been Crowley's edition of the Lesser Key, which means that they were familiar with Crowley and probably would have been like led from Crowley to Kenneth Grant in the 80s. So these ideas that the Collins elite have about UFOs and aliens and stuff are probably a direct mimetic line back to Kenneth Grant, and specifically Outside the Circles of Time. But I'm still kind of working on this. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I was going to pop off with, I'm pretty sure Trinity is the key. I think saying that it was the Babylon working puts way too much credit into the hands of Jack Parsons and his little group there. Mm-hmm. No, I think a hole was blown into and out of our reality. A literal piercing of a veil in an explosive fashion. And it didn't start at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It started here at Trinity.
Well,
Think about it. If you're building a bomb, you're not quite 100% sure what it's going to do. You know it's going to be bad. But, literally, it could have basically unzipped reality in a very messy way. And it did it in the United States. And nobody warned anybody who lived around it because, of course, they were trying to keep it so secret because it was wartime.
Mm-hmm.
And so we essentially sacrificed our own people.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing new there.
Yeah. The U.S. has been doing that since forever. But essentially, if you look at it, though, from a magical perspective, these were innocents who were sacrificed.
Yeah.
And all of the people who were downwind of that, who later came down with cancer because of, radiation spewed all over the place, they also were innocent. And so it is kind of a, for whatever reason, my focus is on Trinity and then the two explosions that happened after that somehow we ripped a big giant hole. And man, we created food for a lot of stuff. It's not like UFOs have never been around before.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Did anything
they've
really
been around
change?
Forever. Maybe new guys came into the equation.
But
we destroyed a lot of them.
That's also a possibility.
And it made them mad.
I think it definitely drew attention to us. I know this is another thread that I've been pulling, but in James Merrill's Changing Light at Sandover, some of the spirits that he's having conversations with via Ouija board are sort of like these, not ascended master type things, but they're like spirits that are not dead human beings. Like he's talking to extra human intelligences. And they tell them that, the earth is a greenhouse and that they feed on, the energy produced by life on this planet, and that they were concerned about the nuclear weapons because the nuclear weapons destroyed the soul.
Yeah.
It was like that they had noticed that after humans started experimenting with nuclear energy at all, like by splitting the atom in any sort of way, that like the souls of like physicists, right, who had worked closely with radioactive material, like their souls had been deteriorated and like it was some sort of corrosive force.
Yeah.
And, I think this comes up in Burroughs too, where he talks about the atom bomb sort of being like
it's a soul killer.
Yeah, soul killer.
As well as the key from Strieber.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I was listening to Material. It's a trip hop group, I think. Maybe something else. I don't know. But they have Seven Souls by William S. Burroughs as part of the song or the piece of music. And I was listening to that one night, and, Burroughs says that the energy from an exploded nuclear bomb is a soul killer. And now it doesn't just kill bodies, it destroys the souls of the victims. Mm-hmm. And in my brain, I went, well, an EMP wave could disrupt energy. Mm-hmm. And if and souls are generally energy. Mm-hmm. Well, what about the non-human spirits floating around, being themselves, living their lives? Mm-hmm. They're getting ripped apart by it too. Well, no wonder they always talk to the contactees like, hey, can you stop with the nukes? It's bad. Yeah. Mother Mary says, hey, stop with the nukes. It's bad. Over and over. Yeah.
And especially if they're sort of dependent on us. See, I think like the whole idea of this being a greenhouse and us being fed on, I think that idea is filtered through our own human lens as we consume animals and plants and stuff to live. I think we tend to see the universe in that same lens. But I know I talked to you, Seriah, about how Archive 81 had got me thinking about myths and stories and how these entities may sort of be literally woven of like stories and myths.
Yeah.
That sort of imaginal energy. And it may be the case that they require us to not blow ourselves up because they wouldn't exist without us.
Yeah.
Their entire existence depends on there being humans on the planet to like create stories for them.
Muses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my way of looking at these things is that they are probably in a wavelength of energy that we're not able to perceive most of the time. So I would think an atomic bomb would also mess that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's interesting parallels too with some of the astroarchaeology stuff too, like the evidence that Mars was nuked to oblivion like several million years ago. And what if, like nuclear weapons kind of are the ultimate sort of weapon, right? They not only destroy physical forms, but they also destroy spirits too.
But do you have, I don't know, how can I put this? Is there evidence to point to a shift in the way these things interact with us pre and post Trinity?
I mean, you definitely have a UFO flap in the United States post 1947.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like you said, Seriah, I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that it's what let them in, but I think it's almost like you kicked a hornet's nest. It got them stirred up. Because you definitely have. I mean, if you read Passport to Magonia, you know that weird people have been seeing weird stuff in the sky since humans were able to record.
Yeah.
So it's not like these things have always been with us. But I definitely think, it was like kicking a hornet's nest.
I think it was sometime after 1947 that they started really emphasizing space in their messages to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when they started really trying to get our heads around, we're from space. We're from space. Space, the final frontier, y'all. That's what we're doing. That's because you do see that whole idea of things from space. And, science fiction really got into it. But I mean, there were people seeing and contacting ether ships back in the 1930s. And, that it wasn't from space. It was from the ether.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was inspiring them to, make really cool paintings and stuff. So,
I mean, that's sort of like
that was
It almost makes me wonder if the idea of them being from outer space, we don't take that too literally, or we take that too literally, because something a kick I've been on lately is this idea that like space is the underworld, that like indigenous people, I think the indigenous Australians say that like the stars are the campfires of the ancestors.
Yeah.
And this idea that you even see this in like Greek culture, especially Dionysian stuff, that souls kind of go to the heavens after they die. You don't necessarily go on. We call it the underworld, but it's not necessarily underground. But that the underworld is actually the night sky. And in that sense, these spirits who are maybe from the underworld and maybe have something, like Strieber says, something to do with the human dead, they are coming from outer space. It's just not the outer space that we think of literally. It's more this metaphorical sense, like they come from the heavens in general.
Yeah.
I looked it up, and there have been over 2,000 nuclear bombs detonated over the course of our history.
Which needs to freaking stop, my God.
I think
How many times now?
I think mostly they have. I don't think you see a lot of nuclear tests anymore.
They're not testing them like they were. But I remember even as a kid that they were still testing stuff, and I was like, have you not figured it out yet?
Yeah. Well, I think Russia detonated
guys?
the biggest one.
Yeah.
Tsar Bomba.
Which is, again, at this point, we can annihilate the planet 10 times over. What are you testing for?
Yeah, I know, right?
And now you
I have a new idea. Let's test not doing any of that. Just stop.
And it's not even like they're being armed to, say, take out asteroids coming this way or reposition them or something.
Which would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Except with our luck, it'd, explode in the atmosphere, and there we'd be. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we certainly tried to find ways to repurpose them. I mean, that's why there were plans to use them to do natural gas fracking out in the Southwest.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and that's what probably led to cattle mutilation stuff, because, we might have irradiated thousands of heads of cattle, but we can't tell these ranchers that we might have done this, because then we'll be liable,
Yes.
for all these expensive animals. So
we're just going to run around and pretend to be UFOs, and we'll test a few of them. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, there's also a few of those outlier cases that don't seem like they could have been done by humans.
Yep.
And then you're like, okay, so is there something else here, or are these stories not true? I mean, it's easy to say, well, the really weird ones just aren't true, but we don't know.
Well, I mean, there's been cattle mutilation types of events in Britain, except it's not cattle, it's sheep and horses.
And there was a point, I know John Keel talks about it, where dogs and cats were getting cut in half.
Yep. I remember those cases back in the 70s and 80s. There was a wave of it in West Virginia. And yeah, that was really upsetting.
Yeah.
Because I love animals, and I was, fairly young at the time, but there was a wave of it in Charleston sometime in that time period, because it was really awful. And
was there ever a good explanation offered of?
Nope, nobody caught anybody.
And how would you do? I mean, that's not an easy thing to do.
I know, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would assume that it was people doing it, though.
I figured it was too. But, you want to know who's doing that, because that's ramping up serial killer behavior kind of stuff. You kind of want to catch them early.
Man, that's a dark rabbit hole that I've been going down lately, that I am not sure where I land on it yet. But after I read Program to Kill last year, and, I don't necessarily agree with McGowan on a lot of stuff, but it definitely got me looking back again at satanic panic type stuff, which I had largely completely written off and sort of recoiled at, which I feel like a lot of people do and see it as, just hysteria or whatever. But then you actually dig a little bit into some of it, and it's okay, some of it was something maybe actually legitimately dark and weird going on.
Really?
But it's very hard to sort of suss out what's real and what's not when you start getting into that stuff.
Well, yeah, because you saw a lot of kids who didn't have complaints being hypnotized and basically led into saying things.
Oh yeah, listen to the transcripts or read the transcripts, and it's terrifyingly obvious.
Which means they're the ones actually causing these kids the trauma over something that never happened, but now they believe did.
Yeah, I keep meaning to do an episode about the satanic panic, because I kind of almost was a victim of that, and no.
Wow.
No.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, getting this stuff how do you feel about the Henry Lee Lucas stuff?
Who's Henry Lee Lucas?
He's a murderer.
Yeah, he was a serial killer, and he claimed that he was trained by this satanic cult called the Hand of Death in the Florida Everglades. And they were the ones who taught him how to kill, and he was carrying out stuff for them, both kidnapping and murder. And it's very odd, but then there are not necessarily corroborating things going on, but then there's I just found out, Wayne Williams, who was sort of charged with the Atlanta child murders and stuff back in the 80s, or was it the 70s? It
was early 80s, as I recall.
So Wayne Williams later in his life wrote this autobiography where he was talking about in an autobiography, he said that he was trained by the CIA at this facility in the woods of North Georgia when he was 16 or something. But then later during an interview with, I think, Soledad O'Brien, he wouldn't talk more about it and said that he couldn't talk more about it, and that, what he wrote was true and that was all he was going to say. And after being badgered a bit, he kind of opened up a little bit about it and talked about, being trained in weapons and close combat and stuff, like in it's sort of like Woods training camp with like other teenage kids. And it's like, well, that's crazy. There's nothing like that could have existed, right? But then you look it up, and it did actually exist. It was like an ex-CIA guy who was like a former OSS operative who established this like sort of JROTC thing in the woods of North Georgia, where he was like training teenagers in like military stuff.
Huh.
It's so weird. And it's like, what do I make? I don't know what to make of this. You know, it's like, I don't even know where to go with it, because it's so weird and creepy.
Well, the thing about, I'm not saying you can't believe anything a serial killer says. I'm not saying that. But they do often have this story that they want to tell that lives in their head that makes what they do okay. And I don't doubt that maybe they had some kind of weirdo training. Right. That could happen. I'm not saying that there aren't crazy gun nut people living in the woods somewhere training people for cash.
Yeah.
I grew up in Appalachia. I'm probably related to some of those guys. But I would see most of what's being said by the serial killers in question as a kind of, this is my mythology, and this is what I tell myself. And it's a good story, you know, because, you know, people can be serial killers and not really be crazy.
Right. Oh, yeah.
They just are broken enough that they can do these things. But they make up stories in their heads, and those are the stories they tell. I had a friend who studied serial killers for a play that she was writing, and you know, she was like, hey, you should read this. And so I read a big stack of books, and then I was like, hey, you know, I really kind of hate you now because you made me read this. Thank you.
You ever read Program to Kill?
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, McGowan's whole like thesis, right, is that they're at least the majority, like there are actual like serial killers. I mean, they're like historical people, and sometimes there are actual serial killers, but the majority of the serial killers, especially during the big wave in like the 70s and 80s, weren't necessarily like working alone, or, you know, in some cases they may have been victims of like mind control type experiments and stuff. Like, you look at several serial killers who all spent time in psychiatric, like army, they were all ex-military, and they all spent time in like the same army psychiatry hospital in West Germany. And it's like,
oh, that's not suspicious or anything.
No.
Yeah, it's like all these guys, they come back home after their, you know, tours or whatever, and all of a sudden they start killing people. Like, it's weird. And, you know, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with McGowan on everything. He gets really into the weeds with a lot of like numerology and occult stuff. He gets like kind of like James Shelby Downard-ish with some of his ideas, but the actual main thesis, like, I'm not that opposed to. And anyways, my big point was that, like, you know, the animal murders and stuff like that. Sometimes I do wonder if there is more to some of that than I think a lot of people like myself are willing to admit. You know, because we don't want to edge into like fundamentalism or satanic panic type stuff, but
nor do we want to point fingers at ourselves by accident.
Yeah, exactly. Because absolutely. It's so funny. Like, sometimes my girlfriend will be watching like Dateline, and there'll be like an occult murder kind of thing on there, and it's always just like some guy who had like metal posters in his room and maybe like some books of magic and stuff. And it's like, good Lord, if I'm ever suspected of any kind of crime like that, I am so screwed.
Yeah. The West Memphis Three is a perfect example.
Yeah.
And when you go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say, when you look at these psychological studies that are coming out, they're showing that people who listen to aggressive music tend to be more well balanced psychologically, because they have an outlet for that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's been numerous studies now that have come out saying that it's like, if you listen to metal growing up, you're probably more well balanced than your peers who didn't. So
I can see that.
It kind of does the opposite of what, you know, it was always claimed to be, which was, this is going to make people do bad things. Instead, it's like, oh, I'm angry. I'll listen to this angry music. Oh, well, now I don't feel so angry anymore because I got it out.
Yeah. I headbanged it away.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, repeated motion, very frenetic, emotional overload. No more. Oh, how did that happen?
And oddly, and it doesn't always seem to make sense to people, but if I'm depressed, sometimes listening to depressing music makes me feel better.
Yep.
Like it's something about the fact that like it connects and then like it improves my mood.
Yep.
My girlfriend always makes fun of me because I listen to like spooky atmospheric music, like when I'm driving in the car, like I'm going on walks and stuff. But it's like, I don't know, it kind of puts me at ease. Like I kind of like listening to stuff like that.
Look how hard they tried to blame Columbine on, Marilyn Manson and KMFDM.
Yeah.
And it's like, there was a lot more going on here. This wasn't about the music they listened to.
No.
Man.
No, they were bullied and treated like shit by everybody. And that's what did it.
Look, all I want to know about Columbine is who the third person on the roof was and why there were multiple students who said that there were other shooters other than Dylan and Eric, who that was sort of like swept under the rug and nobody talks about that anymore. Maybe it was just confusion in the moment. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the police definitely saw a third person on the roof with a gun, and that it was not Dylan or Eric. And that is sort of it's sort of similar to the Oklahoma City thing with the John Doe, who is like seen by like 40 different people with Timothy McVeigh, but then is completely dropped in the investigation.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a bunch of weird stuff with the Oklahoma bombing.
Yeah. I'm still meaning to read Wendy Painting's book, Aberration in the Heartland, which is all about Timothy McVeigh. I have not read that yet. I've been meaning to for like a year. I need to just buckle up and read it. But I know a lot of people who really like that book, and it sort of blew up last year. I think a lot of different podcasts were like covering it and having her on as a guest and stuff. But yeah, it talks a lot about some of the weirdness surrounding McVeigh and that bombing and everything, and how much unanswered stuff there is still about that.
Yes. And I believe, if I'm remembering right from a documentary I watched, there's actually footage of them removing bombs from the building.
Yeah.
That didn't go off. I know that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah. There were demolitions experts who said that the given the materials used to make the bomb that they used, it should not have yielded that level of explosion.
Yeah.
That it was anomalous. But yeah. I don't know. This kind of stuff can get people like fired up, so I don't want to go too much into it.
Oh, I know. Yeah. We will start some.
This is a very sensitive topic.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to draw a comparison to was back in the 80s when people were saying that heavy metal would cause you to kill yourself, and what do they cite? Suicide Solution from Ozzy, which is a song about how, excessive drinking can kill you. Yeah. And I always looked at that when, if you even read the lyrics, you would realize this is not a pro-suicide song. Like,
it's not a pro-suicide. It's an anti-drinking.
Yeah.
I was like, what's wrong with Ozzy, y'all?
And why? And with there being actual pro-suicide songs out there.
Yeah.
Why would you pick this?
Yeah. I mean, while we're at it, the Heathers.
The Heathers?
Can you imagine that film being made today? Nobody would allow that film to get made.
I don't even remember Heathers. It's been so long since I've watched it.
Yeah, it's wild.
Now there's a musical of it, and I'm like, okay, that didn't need to happen. I'm sorry. Just my kid Fox is really into musicals. And I'm just like, no, kid, no, not that. No, stop.
Have you ever seen I'm trying to remember the Alexander or something. It was a movie called If that had Malcolm McDowell as like one of his first big roles.
No, I haven't seen that.
It's God, what is the name of the guy? Hang on a second. It's Lindsay Anderson, who wrote it and directed it. And
What's the name of it?
It's just called If, like if ...
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, it's also a movie that could never be made nowadays.
Okay.
Huh.
But it's like a Malcolm McDowell being in this like sort of British like boys' school. It's like a satire of boys' school public, like a sort of public school life.
Okay, cool. I'll have to watch that.
I've never heard of this. Huh.
Yeah, it got a re-release like 10 years ago or something. But yeah, I watched a long time ago.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Mid-show break here, and I'm going to start out with some contact info. And of course, if you want extra content all month long, become a patron. It's only $3. Helps the show out greatly. So if you like what you're hearing, that's the best way to help out. And yeah, like I said, there's extra content pretty much every week, sometimes more than once a week. I have some extra special stuff I throw in there once in a while. As far as contact, everything can be found at wheretheroadgo.com, including the link to become a patron. And there are links to all our social media, Facebook page, group, what used to be Twitter. There's our Discord, everything, YouTube, it's all there. And if you want to submit a story for one of our listener stories episodes, it's stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. There's also a contact tab that will give you all of that info as well. So, my recommendation for this week, something I haven't recommended, but we've talked about on the show, Believer, the podcast Believer. And this is done by Julie Saunder, who I've actually had on the show. It's actually Believer, a paranormal mystery. And I'm recommending this particularly now. Not only is it a great podcast, and I realized I hadn't actually recommended it at any point, as far as I know, but there's a new season coming very soon. So it's a good time to go check out the first season, which is, there's Bigfoot stuff in there, and there's some really high strangeness stuff, and some Lovecraftian stuff. I thought it was really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even a story from the point of view of her dog. So it has some lighthearted moments, certainly, but it's also very dark. And the second season, I'm very curious where she's going to go with it. And if you look back in the history of this show, you will find that she was a guest, and it was a very, very good conversation with her. Probably bring her back on after the second season starts. We'll see. But that's my recommendation. Believer, a paranormal mystery by Julie Saunder podcast. All right. And now we're back. So I'm here with Barbara Fisher and Wren Collier on Where Did the Road Go? One of the things I wanted to bring up, since we were talking where all this disclosure stuff is going, is how hilarious is it that the Mexican thing, whatchamacallit, brings out a mummy that is obviously fake.
Yeah.
So obviously fake.
Well, slick Jaime's at it again. It's wild to me that after the Roswell slide stuff in 2015, that people took him seriously enough for him to pull the same crap in 2017 and then pull it again in 2023.
Yeah.
Right? It's crazy. It's like bonkers to me that people are still falling for this stuff. But honestly, most of the people that I've seen talking about this on like Twitter and other places have no idea who he is. Right. They're just seeing the pictures and seeing the news story and being like, oh, I wonder if this is real or whatever. Yeah. A lot of people are just like fun of it, but
yeah, I've seen enough people, say, oh, but there were scientific studies of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, no, it looks like paper mache. It probably is.
I saw one person make a comment that was like, they were making a joke about it, and they were like, why do these aliens always look like aliens from movies? And then somebody replied to that and was like, well, it's because the people who make the movies know what's really going on or whatever.
No,
that's not it. You're thinking about
it's the complete opposite of what you think.
It's really funny. It has been incredible meme material. I know I've got a picture of the little alien face on my phone, and it's made for some pretty good jokes. But overall, it's wild how easy it is to still grift these days in the paranormal.
Because people don't look at the history of it.
Yeah.
Either they're just kind of vaguely interested in it, and they see this thing, and they're told, oh, it's an alien, an alien mummy, and they're like, really?
Yeah.
Or they should know better, but they just haven't done their research.
Sorry, I know you like pro wrestling. How similar to this do you feel like it's like pro wrestling?
Oh,
where
totally.
Pro wrestling, people who watch pro wrestling, like they know that it's like not real, right? But they sort of like play along because it's fun.
Right.
I kind of feel like this is the same deal in a lot of this disclosure and UFO stuff, where it's like these people know in their heart of hearts that this is BS, but they're just playing along because it's fun.
I feel like the way it's like pro wrestling is this. You can have a guy who's a face. Face is the guy everyone cheers for and loves. And they can make what's called a heel turn. Suddenly they're a bad guy. And then everyone hates them because, well, now they're the bad guy. And then, like, a few months later, they make a face turn, and now they're a face, and everyone loves them again. And it's like,
yep.
It's like, isn't this kind of what's happening in, this UFO stuff? Like, people just keep doing the same stuff, and it's
really
like,
seems like it.
Have you not learned?
And the thing with pro wrestling is it's formulaic, it's a game, it's entertainment. And I can't look down on people for being entertained by it because it's entertaining. But this UFO stuff,
yeah.
I'm like, guys, no, you cannot look at that and go, oh, it's so real. It's not. I mean, this is the worst one yet, I think.
It's really bad.
Because it's not really made out of body parts. Like the Peru mummies, they, scavenged actual human body bits, and I mean, that's terrible.
Yeah.
But at least it had sort of an anatomical look to it that was not completely messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Marx, baby. It's, history always repeats itself. First is tragedy, then is farce.
Yeah.
I remember back in the 90s when we had the alien autopsy, right? And there was real that, right? That was a high production hoax. Really.
Well, and that's one of the things Nick talks about in his Roswell book, that it actually wasn't a fake video. It was a video of these kids with these deformities that they would do high altitude balloon tests on.
Well, I believe that that's what really happened at Roswell, but I don't believe that the alien autopsy video was an autopsy of one of those kids.
Yeah, so I
agree with Nick's thesis about what Roswell was, right, for sure. But I don't think the alien autopsy video itself was actually that.
He wasn't the one that said it was real. It was someone he talked to who had very specific things that they did, like removing the lenses. In the film, and they said, yeah, those lenses were put in to protect their eyes. Like, they weren't supposed to die in these things. They knew that was a possibility, and they would then test them afterwards. So they had these contact lenses in, and the woman said that what she saw removed were the exact contact lenses they were using.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Because
I assumed it was fake.
It really didn't look like a dead body.
Yeah.
And I did used to, work at a med school, so I got to see some of those. And it really didn't look right.
It didn't look right to me either, but at least now I have a question mark there where it's like, well, I mean, maybe it was a human, and they're just selling it as an alien.
Yeah.
I love that it spawned a really hilarious bit in a Stephen Chow movie.
What was that?
There was an autopsy of the celestial fairy that fell to Earth. It's in the film. I think it's in the film God of Cookery, but it might be Forbidden City Cop. Actually, I think it's Forbidden City Cop. But it was set in the 19th century, early 20th century, and this being fell from heaven. And Stephen Chow, was the detective, and he was, investigating it. And it did this whole send up of the alien autopsy. I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard. I was crying. It was so funny. We actually had to stop the video and go back so we could, see all of it. Read all of the subtitles so we'd get all of the goodness. It was pretty good.
And when you look through all that stuff and all the different stuff that's been floated as real and then of course turned out to be nonsense, that's why it's so hard to understand why so many people are still taking this seriously. Not the subject of UFOs, but the whole, they're going to tell us anything.
Oh, yeah. I do wonder about that. Again, trusting people.
I was talking to a friend of mine who's not very well informed with this stuff. I mean, most of his stuff seems to come from like YouTube videos and Ancient Aliens. But he was, all pro disclosure. And I said, dude, they're not going to tell us anything. And he's like, well, that's just because the government won't let them. And I'm like,
no, not really.
And I said, and they're not even aliens. He's like, no, they're interdimensionals. And I went, okay, we're done. I'm not having this conversation.
Yeah.
You've now replaced the term extraterrestrial with interdimensional, and it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least extraterrestrial, we can say there's almost certainly life out there. We don't know if there's anything that's interdimensional.
Yeah, we don't even know if other dimensions even exist.
Exactly.
At least we don't have like proof of it.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
we have plenty of theory.
Mm.
You should have told him it was ultra-terrestrials and to hush up. He didn't know the secret.
I mean, that's probably the better term. If they for the way I look at it, if they exist alongside us, it's outside of our ability to perceive. So yeah, ultra-terrestrial would make more sense as a term.
Crypto-terrestrial.
Yeah.
Something like that. Although then the crypto bros will be like, oh, is that a new? No, it's not.
Yes. Every once in a while, someone will add me, and I'll see crypto in their about me or whatever. I'll be like, oh no, they're talking cryptocurrency. I thought they were interested in cryptids. Okay.
I thought they were interesting. Gosh, look at me.
And then you have Wren, who's interested in both.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
I do trade the digital things, but mostly because it's a 24/7 casino, and there are a lot of unsophisticated participants.
You sound like my friend Chris. Yes, yeah.
Huh.
It's a thing that you can buy and sell, and therefore I can trade it.
Fair. All right. Bigfoot you're talking about, right?
Hmm?
Bigfoot is what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm buying and selling Bigfoots in the black market.
Did you pick one up in Georgia from a freezer?
No, but I picked up a screaming alien from a freezer one.
Well, that's all right then.
You picked up a what?
The screaming alien.
Oh, the screaming alien. Oh my God. Oh, the screaming alien is one of the best, worst hoaxes.
I still find it like kind of surreal that Joe Matheny like follows me on Twitter and sometimes like interacts with me. Because it's like literally John Titor follows me on Twitter.
Yeah, I thought he had passed away.
No, he's still around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's friends with Metcalf.
Huh.
Yeah, he's really cool. Like we talk sometimes. I don't like know him really well or anything, but it's just sort of surreal to me because it's like he's someone that I've definitely always like kind of admired and like thought was like a super cool person, and yeah, it's just cool that he like thinks that I'm cool enough to like my tweets.
Yeah, well, didn't he disappear for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've only kind of like followed him for a couple years now, but I think he was kind of gone for a while. You probably have to like ask Metcalf or something, but the whole reveal as him being the originator of like John Titor was only maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. Like one of my old internet acquaintances, Kathor Jensen, wrote a whole article about it, where it sort of like revealed some of the stuff. And it wasn't always Matheny, but he was the originator of it. Like
Yeah.
he kind of like set it off, and then other people like ran with it, but he was the original sort of.
Because I know I did a show on it, and that was the thing, is that he was at least the one who came up with it and started the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I thought it was kind of like a collaborative myth-making, storytelling thing that he was doing with his friends. Because I mean, like he's sort of the originator of the whole idea of like ARGs.
Yeah. Huh. So one of the things we were going to talk about here is the Djinn. Now, where are the Djinn coming into this whole equation? Did somebody bring them up?
Yeah, Strieber.
Okay, so it's Strieber. Okay.
Yeah.
As the Djinn by name. Which is interesting. I mean, Strieber is also clear too that by jinn he doesn't mean like demon, right? And in Islam, the jinn aren't necessarily good or evil. They can be both. There's some jinn.
They're like people.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think anytime you're dealing with the spirit world, I think they can be like people in that sense.
Yeah.
Well, they are people, essentially. They just aren't physical people like we think of as people.
Yeah. They interact differently.
Yeah. And if they're energy-based, then they don't have permanent bodies and all of that. Yeah. Although the jinn do have bodies made of what's called smokeless fire. Yeah. Sounds plasmoid to me.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I always thought, that Keel all but called them jinn.
Mm-hmm.
He all but called his ultra-terrestrials jinn the way that he described them, as they were, these beings that were made primarily of a type of energy,
mm-hmm.
and that they could take on temporary physical form,
mm-hmm.
and they interacted with humans. Some of them were decent. Some of them were very indecent. Most of them just seemed to really get on, with their lives, making fun of humans and messing with humans and just having fun with us. But the history, what the jinn in the Islamic countries are, I wish I could get this lady. She lives here in town, and she's Muslim, and she found out I was doing a paranormal podcast, and she said, ghosts aren't ghosts. They have nothing to do with humans.
Right.
And I knew what she was going to say. And I said, oh, I know. I said, I think most of the ghost hunters, what they're interacting with isn't human spirits either.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, we think it's the jinn. And there are jinn who are godly and they're Muslim. And then there are the ones who are ungodly. And she said they follow shaitan.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, but then the ones in the middle are the ones who are meant to lead people astray or tempt us.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, but they're not demons. The ones who are with shaitan, those are like what Christians would call demons.
Mm-hmm.
She said, the ones who follow Islam, though, they're not what we would call angels. Those are angels. So it was really funny. She said, I've talked to so many Christians, and they go, so jinn are just like angels and demons. It's like, yeah, I figure you've had that a lot too. Yeah. And I have to explain to them, no, we have angels and they're called angels.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they are.
Yeah.
She said a lot of times if you have things going wrong in your house, if you have a poltergeist, what, here in America you call a poltergeist, if you hear, talking, stuff like that, it's a jinn. And you either go through and do a cleansing on your house. And if that doesn't work, then you have the imam come and, find out what the jinn wants and he'll get it out of your house for you.
I had a woman back in 2018 send me a thing on jinn because she was Muslim. And she said, on the subject of jinns, there are different types. Ifrit jinn that can propel itself at great speeds in the sky, jinns that can imitate the dead, jinns that can enter objects, jinns that can shapeshift, jinns that can enter the body of people and animals. Jinns cannot alter their environment as they inhabit the same space as ours. That frustrates them, as when a building or object is created in our world, it also appears in their world. She said, hey, like the upside down world in Netflix Stranger Things. Mm-hmm. Jinns have certain advantages over man, and likewise, we do have advantages over them. Jinn are very popular explanation for weirdness nowadays, but I don't know how much people attribute to them is accurate to tradition. Jinns were known to the Arabs even before the advent of Islam. Jinns could be, I keep saying Jim. Jinns could be some other sentient that Arabs simply call jinn. They're told in the Quran to be the original inheritors of the earth.
Mm-hmm. And that's why they don't like us.
Yeah.
They were the first ones who had dominion over the earth.
There's an interesting sort of language aspect to UFOs and stuff being called unidentified aerial phenomena now.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a lot of like occult traditions, the Djinn are the same thing as like aerial spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And they're specifically referred as aerial spirits. They're sublunar, so they're not from the heavens like an angel would be, but they're also not from the underworld. They're not chthonic or infernal either. They're spirits of the air, and it's sort of interesting. I doubt that that's why they're using the term unidentified aerial phenomena, but I like that there's like a resonance there.
Yeah. Yeah. I always thought it was kind of weird that Keel didn't just come out and say they're Djinn, damn it.
Yeah, right.
That's what they are, you know. Maybe because there was not a lot of popular literary material that he could point people towards.
Yeah.
I mean,
didn't want to.
There was I Dream of Jeannie.
Oh, well, that's true, you know, because that works.
Yeah.
You know, I just found out not that long ago that Djinn, there's a couple of traditions of Djinn where they inhabit thorny bushes, and if you cut those down, you are then in trouble with the Djinn, much like rowan trees and blackthorns for the fairies.
Interesting.
And they do have a lot in common. Like fairies, they will kidnap people. They will help people sometimes. You can make deals with them. You can. They'll still. I think sometimes they stole cattle or milk, much like fairies and witches supposedly did in Europe. So they're interesting. It's an interesting thing to look at. And there's, finally there's a lot of decent material out there that you can read and look at the similarities and kind of go, I wonder. I just hope they don't decide, if they are Djinn, if that's what's going on, that, they don't decide, well, they're just demons. And because I think that's just, well,
I mean, from an American perspective, I mean, they sound like demons.
Yeah. Yeah.
So who knows? I didn't realize Strieber was the only one that brought that up, because Strieber's not necessarily a part of the disclosure thing, is he?
I don't think so, really.
I'm not sure why he was quoted in that article, but I think that he's maybe not necessarily like part of the in-group, but he's sort of within that same sphere of influence, I think. He's definitely within that sort of Diana Pasulka sort of world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think interlinks up with some of the more esoteric elements of like the Collins elite.
Yeah, I mean, they have some members in common, I think.
Yeah, yeah, like
there's
people
some
like
crossover. There's a Venn diagram happening,
Yeah.
and there's some overlap.
People like who, Wren?
I think like Hal Puthoff, for
Ah,
instance.
okay.
Like mostly like the SRI folks,
Maybe Gary Nolan.
for instance.
But there is a book called The Truth About Alien Abductions by Peter Howe and Moishe Kalman. And the first chapter of this book is not really about alien abduction per se. It's actually about Djinn abduction. Because I got one paragraph in and went, "You're not talking about aliens. Those aren't aliens, y'all." But the very first chapter is called "Magic Carpet Ride," and it's about a British fellow and his Iranian friend. This is pre-revolution, so it's in the, I think, mid-1970s. Yeah, it's in the mid-1970s exactly. And they go out for a hike up in these mountains. They lived in Tehran. And as this man says, Tehran is not a pretty city. And so we tried to get out into nature as much as possible. And so they go up into these mountains and they walk until it's nearly dark. And there are these shelters up in the mountains that, anybody who's up there can stay the night. And so they're going to stay the night there. And there was also a shrine near the this shelter which was shrine to, it's a burial of one of the prophet's descendants. So you got a little graveyard action going here, and I'm like, Djinn are going to show up because they often live near places like burials and cemeteries.
Right.
And so they do eventually go to sleep, and they wake up, and it says a few feet away stood three men. They were dressed from head to toe in black, rather like the SAS. Each carried a torch-like instrument, and the only feature that I can remember is their eyes, slightly mongoloid, similar to those of the Turkoman in the eastern part of Iran. But these eyes were much bigger and more lustrous. It was as though the upper part of their face was all eyes. And they were worried that it was the Shah's secret police. A reasonable worry, really.
Right.
But they were taken by these men. They said, pack your things, come with us, and they really were afraid they were going to get, shot. But no, they ended up taking him along a path, and then after a few hundred feet, suddenly, inexplicably, we realized we were no longer on the path, but in some sort of room. Instead of stones and twigs under our feet lay a thick Persian carpet. It was as beautiful as any seen hanging in a bazaar or behind the windows on Ferdowski Avenue, the carpet center of Tehran. This sudden transformation elicited not the slightest tremor of surprise from us, which, now he's saying that was strange. It seemed right, to use the phrase my friend uttered long after the incident was over. The three men switched off their torches, and as soon as they did so, the whole place was bathed in the softest of lights. We were in the middle of what seemed to be an oval-shaped room, and were invited to sit cross-legged on the floor. A screen took up the whole of one long wall. I call it that, yet it felt like we could have fallen through. We could see the branches of trees and past them the distant lights of the city. So that this wall has translucency to it that he can see the outside with. Well, they get flown all around, which is right weird. They can see Tehran below them. They are gone it didn't seem like it was that long, but when they get out, it's 2 p.m. They had been picked up around 2 a.m., so they were gone for 12 hours. It didn't feel like 12 hours. It basically, nothing else really happened to them, except that they saw all of these pictures on the screen that they were overwhelmed by. But they were set down and let out. And when they were let out, the room was gone, the tent or room or whatever it was. This affected the British man so strongly. It pretty much changed his entire idea of what reality is.
Wow. Because
it had physical reality to it. He could feel the carpet. They were sitting cross-legged on it, and he said he could, he was trying to hold on to the carpet because he felt like he was going to fall out because it was fluid. The movement was very fluid, like it wasn't super solid. It was like it was fabric moving through space.
Yeah.
And it really affected him, but it terrified his friend. And his friend wouldn't speak about it for years and years and years. And finally, his friend said, why don't you talk to this man? And he sent him to a Sufi imam. And the Sufi imam said straight up exactly what I'd been saying the whole time is, oh, those are Djinn. And he said, they are here to make us question. They are here to tempt us to come outside of our faith. They are tricksters, and they like to play games with people. So there it is. It's in it's an alien abduction book.
When did that come out?
When did it come out? Let me see. And it's weird. Right after I agreed to do this, I started reading this book. And I was like, wait a minute. First published in the UK, 1997.
Okay. So not real old.
Not real old, not real young. In the middle.
Well, we are out of time. Barbara, where can people find you?
6degreesofjohnkeel.com. It's a 6 like a number and the rest of it is spelled out. And you can also get me on email. It's, 6djk67@gmail.com.
All right. And Wren?
You can find me at liminalroom.com, which has my contact info if you want to get in touch with me. I also run a cult-themed Discord server. If people are on Discord and they want to chat. And you can also find me on Twitter at liminalbird and same on Blue Sky.
All right, cool. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
I want to take a moment here to give a shout out to all of my Patreons. Because of you, this show continues to be possible. And I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, CJ, Greg Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Janet Shaw Binns, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Paul Jeffries, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, A Crocodile, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very, very much. There is a Patreon extra, of course, for this show. So Patreons will be getting that in a few days. Again, if you want to become a patron, it's the best way to help out the show. $3 a month is all it costs. I have never raised that price since day one, and I don't really intend on doing so. So I want people to get the content. And again, that little bit, it adds up, and it helps out a great deal. All right, so there's that, and I am going to be at Albatwitch, as far as I know, this year. That will be the 14th of October down in Columbia, Pennsylvania. Tim Renner, of course, will be there. Chris Ernst should be coming up. The plan is to get there with some DVDs and Blu-rays of the documentary that Chris filmed about me and Where Did the Road Go. So you'll be able to get a hard copy of that very cheap if you come down and find me at Albatwitch. I'll be putting some on Tim's table as well, though I probably won't get there till the afternoon. I think it goes to like 5, and we're still working out if anything might be going on afterwards. So, you can come down and meet me in person. Say hi, hang out. And that's the Albatwitch Day event in Columbia, Pennsylvania. I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.